Cook. Uh, I found that in talking about Abdu'l-Baha, of course, there's so many things that can be said that I wanted to focus on something that is not unusual to know about him, but that is perhaps not taken sufficient note of. And that is the strategic part he played in the architecture or the construction of the world order of Baha'u'llah. Um, the slideshow I'm going to use will demonstrate 7 particular either institutions he created or aspects of the institutions that without which the world order of Baha'u'llah would not have occurred. Now, of course, the keystone, if you will, to the construction of that mighty ark, or that far-flung ark, as the Guardian calls it, is the House of Justice, the last strategic part of the world order to be put in place, which therefore completed that ark. Not the buildings on Mount Carmel, but the framework, if you will, of the essential components, the strategic parts of a planetary government that, according to Shoghi Effendi, is the furthermost expression of governance at the planetary level. So it will become refined, it will become added to, and so on. But the skeletal framework that Abdu'l-Baha was responsible for in so many ways, that's as good as planetary governance gets. And that would be true, I would presume, for any planet. So I'm going to start a PowerPoint that I will first share my screen, and we'll continue talking and sharing with you the particularly important 7 things that I feel are strategic insofar as Abdu'l-Baha's role as, I call him architect, though I remember a long time ago there was a study book that said that Shoghi Effendi was the architect. Well, of course, they both were. They worked hand in hand. But the actual making of these institutions that flesh out the blueprint in the Kitab-i Aqdas are attributed to, and correctly so, largely to the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which was a surprise not only to Shoghi Effendi to find out that he was a guardian, because he didn't even know there would be such a thing. All of the Baha'is presumed that when Abdu'l-Baha passed, there would be an immediate election of the House of Justice. And they assumed this because they knew that was the final building block in the world order of Baha'u'llah. And so when they discovered in the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, a whole new process had been developed whereby the House of Justice could not be elected until a number of other institutions were created. And that's what we're going to look at, as what Abdu'l-Baha did that so surprised the world. Because if you remember, when you study guidance about participating on a local assembly or consultation in any format on a, whether it be a committee or whatever, the guidance, most of it or a great deal of it is from Abdu'l-Baha. So he didn't create the local community, those had already been created. So you had assemblies and you had many of the same processes that the Guardian later refined already in place. So this is why the assumption was, okay, we've got all of these assemblies in various countries. When Abdu'l-Baha passes, we'll elect the House of Justice. and then everything will be complete. Let's begin first, though, before we get into those 7 specific things he accomplished to bring that about, with some of the titles that indicate some of the duties and some of the capacities with which he was endowed, some of the duties bestowed on him. And these are all titles that were given him by Baha'u'llah himself. Of course, the first one is the Master, Agha. He was called a master, and none of the other children of Baha'u'llah were called this. None of the other males were called this, only Abdu'l-Baha. The mystery of God, the perfect exemplar, the sacred and glorious being, this branch of holiness, the limb of the law of God, the gulf that hath branched out of this ocean, the one round whom all names revolve, the most mighty branch of God, the ancient and immutable mystery, the apple of mine eye. That's one of my favorites. This was, of course, in a tablet that he wrote to Abdu'l-Baha when Abdu'l-Baha, I think, had traveled up to Beirut for a few days. And he wrote a tablet saying how much he missed him. The love between these two beings is just incomparable and inexplicable. A shield unto all who are in heaven and on earth, a shelter for all mankind, a stronghold for whosoever hath believed in God. Now, this is a calligraphy by the famous apostle of Baha'u'llah, Mishkit Kalam, or Kalam. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It doesn't have the accent, so I presume it's Kalam. And these are the titles in a calligraphic form. So we aren't the only ones who are amazed at all the titles and all the duties that were bestowed upon him. So some of the functions or some of the duties that he had, he was the perfect exemplar, of course, the perfect Baha'i. He was the instigator of teaching plans. This had not been done before until he created the tablets of the divine plan, and they became the first institution of the concept of teaching plans that the Guardian later picked up in 1937 with the first 7-year plan. He was the infallible interpreter of the holy text, the successor and head of the faith, the source of guidance for all questions regarding the faith, the source of guidance for spiritual assemblies. And of course, many of his guidance, in the same way, of course, with Baha'u'llah and with the Guardian, many of his discussions about how we should comport ourselves and how we should consult come from questions that were put to him from particular individuals or particular assemblies. He was the architect of the world order, and that's what we're going to concentrate on. We're going to look at, as I say, 7 particular aspects of what he contributed, which are indispensable. This is a statement from a letter on behalf of the House of Justice, and it sort of confirms the thesis of my talk, if you will. So it's not my idea. It's verified by this authoritative statement. In many ways, the will of the master completes and supplements the Aqdas. In it, Abdu'l-Baha lays down in considerable detail the manner of election and function of the International House of Justice, its powers and jurisdiction. He also fills in a remarkable gap in that mighty book of laws, and one which any intelligent commentator on that document must be immediately struck by. So, some of the institutions of the world order of Baha'u'llah created, delineated, or refined. So in other words, when we talk about the institution of the hands of the cause, we know that There were hands of the cause before Abdu'l-Baha was the successor, but there was not an institution of hands of the cause. He created that and the various aspects of it. So what are these 7 things that he either refined or created? The first, spiritual assemblies, I've already mentioned, insofar as how they are to assemble the what happens with the 19-day feast, which was created by the Bab and ratified by Baha'u'llah, but refined by Abdu'l-Baha, which is one of the principal meetings, of course, of the spiritual assemblies. He created the guardianship. No one had anticipated there would be such a thing. It is hinted at in the Kitab-i-Aqdas that it might happen, but no description of how it would take place or what the function of this office might be. We can discuss later why, how, or what passage in the Aqdas anticipates that if you're interested. National spiritual assemblies are what the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha calls the secondary houses of justice. These had not existed before. The universal house of justice, of course, was anticipated from the beginning by Baha'u'llah, but the manner of its election, its duties, how it functions, all of this was refined and spelled out by Abdu'l-Baha. The institution of the hands of the cause, the teaching plans, and finally, the explicit understanding of the twin institutions. And those twin institutions, of course, mentioned in the Aqdas are the learned and the rulers in Baha. So let's look at these individually. The local assemblies, the 19-day feast was, as I've already said, inaugurated by the Bab and ratified by Baha'u'llah, but it's the principles of it and how it is to be conducted were established by Abdu'l-Baha. The guidance on consultation, as I've said, every compilation you see on consultation will inevitably have many, many statements by Abdu'l-Baha. Guidance on duties of teaching for the LSA. What are its purposes? What is its function? Well, its central function, of course, is teaching. Guidance on the election process, and that's in the Will and Testament. And this has to do with both the election of the House of Justice, but it relates also to local assemblies, because in it, the whole idea of secret ballots without electioneering or nomination is set forth. The second institution, and the most important one in one sense, is the guardianship. Now, the guardianship, as I said, was anticipated, possibly so, in the Aqdas. It doesn't mean it was certain, but there is a hint that there might be a necessity for such an individual. How the guardian is appointed is established by Abdu'l-Baha. What the powers of the guardian are delineated. What the authority of the guardian is. How succession would take place. And this, of course, becomes an incredibly important issue in 1960, well, after the guardian's passing in 1957, until the accession of the House of Justice in 1963. Now, this is a statement from The Priceless Pearl by Ruhiya Khanum. It's also stated in a lovely talk by Leroy Iowes. If you haven't heard it, you can Google the talk. It's called In the Days of the Guardian. And it's a talk by Leroy Iowes just months after the passing of Shoghi Effendi. And he says the same thing. And the observation is simply that the guardian had no idea that there would be a guardianship, let alone that he would be the one appointed to such a weighty office. After the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, what Shoghi Effendi and the Baha'is expected, according to Ria Khanum in The Priceless Pearl, Shoghi Effendi had no foreknowledge of the existence of the institution of the guardianship, least of all that he was appointed as guardian. That the most he had expected was that perhaps because he was the eldest grandson, Abdu'l-Baha might have left instructions as to how the Universal House of Justice was to be elected, and he might have been designated the one to see these were carried out and act as convener of the gathering which would elect it. That's the most he expected. And so what does he discover? He discovers this, and this is the quote from the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, where the guardianship is established and where Shoghi Effendi is appointed to that office. Oh, my loving friends, after the passing away of this wronged one, it is incumbent upon the Agsan, the Afnan, and the sacred lote trees, the hands of the cause of God, and the loved ones of the Abha beauty, to turn unto Shoghi Effendi, the youthful branch branched from the two hallowed and sacred lote trees. And of course, lote trees are symbolic of the manifestations, and Shoghi Effendi was descended from both the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And the fruit grown from the union of the two offshoots of the tree of holiness. As he is the sign of God, the chosen branch, the guardian of the cause, he unto whom all the Agsan, the Afnan, the hands of the cause, and his loved ones must turn. So you can see he has full authority over the faith. 24 years old, not expecting this, and suddenly, as a believing Baha'i and a faithful Baha'i, he realizes that the future, not only of the Baha'i faith, but looking at it from a Baha'i point of view, that the future of humankind is suddenly on his shoulders. And you can imagine that whatever honor this might have assumed in his mind was blotted out completely by the just unbearable burden of realizing that this whole success of the future of the faith and of the destiny of humankind was his alone to a great extent. And this, of course, as many of you know, caused him to have to take leave of that position for a while until, as Leroy always says in his talk, quoting the Guardian, what he said to Leroy, Leroy, I had to go and face myself and defeat myself. And once I gave myself over completely to God, then I could become the Guardian. It's a beautiful, beautiful talk. Authority. What is his authority? For he is, after Abdu'l-Baha, the guardian of the cause of God. The Afnan, the hands of the cause, and the beloved of the Lord must obey him and turn unto him. He that obeyeth him not hath not obeyed God. He that turneth away from him hath turned away from God. And he that denieth him hath denied the true one. And of course, this is incredible how explicit this guidance is, considering that it was the family and close ones of Shoghi Effendi that were among the most virulent covenant breakers who turned away from him when Abdu'l-Baha, whom they all cherished and adored, says explicitly, if you turn away from him, you turn away from God. How this could happen, of course, is something that we can think about and read about, but we don't want to experience it, do we? He is, secondly, the infallible interpreter of the text. He is expounder of the words of God, and after him will succeed the firstborn of his lineal descendants. Third, he is president of the Universal House of Justice. The guardian of the cause is its sacred head and distinguished member for life of that body. Now, as a member of that body, he would have had no more vote, or his vote would have had no more weight than the vote of the other 8 members. And his presidency would be no more than the duties of the chairman of an assembly, for example, to keep order. This duty was quite separate from his duty as interpreter of the text. So in the Guardian, because there was no House of Justice during his lifetime, both of the twin institutions are embodied, even as they were with Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. That is, they represented the source of the learning and the source of administration. Position embodies, as I've just said, the twin institutions. It is incumbent upon everyone to aid those daysprings of authority and sources of a command who are adorned with the ornament of equity and justice. Blessed are the rulers and the learned among the peoples of Baha. They are my trustees among my servants and the manifestations of my commandments amidst my people. That's, of course, from Baha'u'llah, the book of his covenant, the Kitab-i-Ad. So during his lifetime, he is the director of the cause. He was the executor of the cause, and he is the source of learning. So I'm just repeating what I've already said. So he embodied both of the twin institutions during his lifetime. Succession. And of course, this became very important inasmuch as Shoghi Effendi had no lineal descendants, nor did he appoint any of the other branches because none of them was eligible. And that is, all of the branches of the descendants of Baha'u'llah had become covenant breakers, all those that were could have been selected. But the proof that they were not is that the Guardian did not do so. The firstborn. Now, there is a caveat in here that Abdu'l-Baha includes, and that is, it's possible that the firstborn might not have the same qualities of Shoghi Effendi. If not, he could appoint someone else. But there's another caveat as well, or not a caveat, but fail-safe, if you will. O ye beloved of the Lord, it is incumbent upon the guardian of the cause of God to appoint in his own lifetime him that shall become his successor, that differences may not arise after his passing. He that is appointed must manifest in himself detachment from all worldly things, must be the essence of purity, must show in himself the fear of God, knowledge, wisdom, and learning. But there could be another branch. Thus, should the firstborn of the guardian of the cause not manifest in himself the truth of the words, the child is the secret essence of its sire, that is, should he not inherit the spiritual within him, the guardian of the cause of God and his glorious lineage not be matched with a goodly character, then must he, the guardian of the cause, choose another branch to succeed him. Now, here is the third aspect of the creation of this institution that's important, and that is, this is really part of another institution he creates, the hands of the cause, but they come to play a hand in the choosing of the successor, if it whether it be the lineal descendant or another branch. It must be approved, the decision, the appointment of the 9-membered body of hands of the cause. The election of these 9 must be carried either unanimously or majority vote from the company of the hands of the cause, and these, whether unanimously or by a majority vote, must give their assent to the choice of the one whom the guardian of the cause of God hath chosen as his successor. This assent must be given in such wise as the assenting and dissenting voices may not be distinguished. In other words, secret ballot. So this is a safeguard, even though the guardian is infallible and the guardian has the authority to choose this, you have the hands of the cause still must approve it. The third institution that Abdu'l-Baha creates, and this was even in some senses a bigger surprise, because it could be that he could have appointed a guardian and the guardian would then assemble the Baha'is from the various assemblies throughout the world and elect the House of Justice. But no, Abdu'l-Baha decided there should be a three-tiered electoral process by which the House of Justice is appointed, or not appointed, is elected. And that is the secondary houses of justice, or what we now call national spiritual assemblies temporarily. And of course, they're not all national. Some are territorial, some are islands, and so on. But we call them national assemblies. But they're really the precursor of what will be called secondary houses of justice. So how does this three-tiered election work? Well, Abdu'l-Baha spells it out in the Will and Testament. In all countries, a secondary house of justice must be instituted, and these secondary houses of justice must elect the members of the universal one. Their part in the three-tiered election of the universal house of justice, they are the pillars, as Shoghi Effendi later calls them. And so when Shoghi Effendi realizes, I can't call for the election of the House of Justice because there are no secondary houses of justice at this time, so we better get to work creating them. And of course, this was up until his dying day during the midst of the 10-year World Crusade, the primary principal purpose of which was to establish these pillars of the supreme institution throughout the world. And those who established spiritual assemblies, the first ones to do so in the new country, were called Knights of Baha'u'llah. So here's how the three tiers of the election process works. Individual Baha'is, it's universal suffrage. Every Baha'i is eligible to participate in electing the delegates to the National Convention. So that's the first level, not the LSAs. The LSAs do not elect it. Individuals who are on LSAs participate, but the institutions don't. So the individuals elect the delegates. The delegates elect the national assemblies, and the national assemblies or secondary houses elect the Universal House of Justice. So this three-tiered process is something else that Abdu'l-Baha created. So he created, I guess I should have added that as another another item that he created as architect. But suffice it to say that by creating the national assemblies and making them the electors of the House of Justice, he created two distinctly different things: the institution of the territorial or national assemblies, the secondary houses of justice, and making them the electors of the Universal House of Justice. The consultation and decision-making, of course, of these secondary assemblies is modeled and patterned after his guidance to the local assemblies. The fourth creation of Abdu'l-Baha as architect, the Universal House of Justice. Now, of course, he didn't create this. Baha'u'llah did, but he created the means by which it would be elected and how it would conduct its business. The establishment of it, the structure of it, the authority of it, the infallibility of it, and the succession. So let's look at each one of those. The establishment, well, we've just said, the Universal House of Justice to be elected, universally elected and established. And again, universally, because you start at the first tier level where all Baha'is participate in electing the delegates. Its members must be manifestations of the fear of God and daysprings of knowledge and understanding, must be steadfast in God's faith and the well-wishers of all mankind. By this house is meant the universal house of justice, that is, in all countries, a secondary house of justice must be instituted, and these secondary houses of justice must elect the members of the universal one. Third, establishing the secondary houses of justice. That must be accomplished. And while Abdu'l-Baha did not give specific instructions about how this would take place, he left that in the hands of the guardian to instigate or institute the forming of these secondary houses of justice. And so we know, for example, that in the United States, the precursor of the first NSA was the Baha'i Temple Unity, which Abdu'l-Baha used as a training ground. A lot of people have noted that this was sort of a means by which he used that institution, which was elected from the generality of believers, as sort of a precursor of the House of Justice. So I recall, and I may have this wrong, I'm sure one of you might know, that we date the beginning of the United States National Spiritual Assembly from the election of the Temple Unity. So again, the three-tiered process for the election of the House of Justice. The structure, men of the House of Justice. This was interpreted infallibly to mean not just people, but men, specifically males. Why? And the answer is, we don't know yet, but Abdu'l-Baha says we will know, that it has nothing to do with the equality of men and women or their capacities, but when we understand the reason, it will be clear as the sun at midday. So in other words, we may think we know, but when we know, we will know we know, because it will be clear as the sun at midday. Why no chair or head? There is presently no chair of the House of Justice on a permanent basis. There's no one elected. It rotates because the guardian would have been the chair. So if he could not be there in person, he would appoint someone to represent him. The members are elected to a 5-year term. I don't think that's in the will and testament, so I'm not sure off the top of my head where the decision to make a 5-year term was created, perhaps by the House of Justice itself. The authority, what authority does the House have? Unto the most holy book everyone must turn, and all that is not expressly recorded therein must be referred to the House of Justice. Now this too is from the will and testament. That which this body, whether unanimously or by majority, doth carry, that is verily the truth and the purpose of God himself. Whoso doth deviate therefrom is verily of them that love discord, hath shown forth malice, and turned away from the Lord of the covenant. And notice this is not just simply the new laws they make, which they are capable of making so long as they do not contradict or conflict with anything that Baha'u'llah has ordained. And they can abrogate the same laws that they create. But all of their decisions have this weight. This is something they think that contemporary Baha'is are not clear about, that the decisions, regardless of what the decisions are about, have this authority. Infallibility. The House of Justice decisions are infallible. There has been a lot of discussion in recent decades about this. Does it mean simply by infallibility that you don't question their decisions, or the buck stops here? And the answer is no. And that's made clear as long ago as the writing of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. It is incumbent upon these members of the Universal House of Justice to gather in a certain place and deliberate upon all problems which have caused difference, questions that are obscure, and matters that are not expressly recorded in the book. Whatsoever they decide has the same effect as the text itself. Now, that line by itself does not necessarily mean they're infallible. That means that it has the same authority as the text. Well, the text, of course, would include the Agdas. And so if they create a law, it has the same weight as the law of Baha'u'llah. But in this particular sentence from the Will and Testament, the idea of infallibility is made clear. And now concerning the house of justice, which God hath ordained as the source of all good and freed from all error, it must be elected by universal suffrage, that is, by the believers. Source of all good, freed from all error. What does infallibility mean? It means that it is the truth. It is freed from error. There are no degrees of infallibility. You can't say, well, this is more infallible than that. No, something is either infallible or it is not. And so when Abdu'l-Baha ordains this authority on this institution, he means that Baha'u'llah is looking over this institutions and that their decision is not simply the sum total of the 9 intelligences that are considering a matter, but that what they finally decide is ordained, if you will, by God to be the correct answer. So something occurs, if you will, when they meet together according to this guidance and discuss and consult and make a decision. Because it has the same authority as the text, believers, now this is not from the Will and Testament, this is from me. The believers can't pick and choose any more than they can with the laws and guidance of Baha'u'llah. They may do it, but they are doing so inappropriately. And of course, they are, if you will, turning away from the guidance of God. Succession, well, of course, that we've dealt with. Every 5 years, the 3-tiered election. The next to last item we come to is the hands of the cause. Now, there were hands of cause that were appointed posthumously or recognized posthumously by Abdu'l-Baha, some that were designated by Baha'u'llah. But the hands of the cause as an institution, this is something that Abdu'l-Baha created. We've already seen their authority insofar as the selection of the guardianship. So what did he do in the Will and Testament? How are they appointed? What authority do they have? What functions do they have? How are they succeeded? How do you get more hands of the cause? So let's look at each one of those. They're appointed by the guardian. He is the only one that can appoint them. The hands of the cause of God must be nominated and appointed by the guardian of the cause of God. All must be under his shadow and obey his command. Now, this next sentence is extremely important because it comes to play in the rebellion of Mason Remy, who was a hand of the cause and rebelled against the decision of the hands. Should any within or without the company of the hands of the cause disobey and seek division, the wrath of God and his vengeance will be upon him, for he will have caused a breach in the true faith of God. So what should they do? Well, that comes under their functions. Their first function is teaching, diffusing the fragrances of God. This body of the hands of cause is under the direction of the guardian of the cause. He must continually urge them to strive and endeavor to the utmost of their ability to diffuse the sweet savors of God and to guide all the peoples of the world, for it is the delight of divine guidance that causeth all the universe to be illumined. The second function has to do with what they had to decide about Mason Remy. Protection. My object is to show that the hands of the cause must be ever watchful, and so soon as they find anyone beginning to oppose and protest, excuse me, against the guardian of the cause, cast him out from the congregation of the people of Baha, and in no wise accept any excuse from him. And that's precisely what the hands of the cause did with Mason Remy, as well as other covenant breakers. The title custodians is an important term because this is a term that was used in the appointment of the last contingent of the hands in 1957, just a month before the guardian passed. And it gave them legal authority to take over the guidance of the World Center and see that the, excuse me, I'm not sure that custodians was the right word, but they were called the custodians of the faith. At any rate, that period during which the hands of the cause were in charge of the faith between the death of the guardian in 1957 and the election of the House of Justice in 1963, the custodians, which is sometimes called the interregnum, which is Latin for between reigns or kings, that they elected the 9 members as Abdu'l-Baha had told them to do. And that 9-membered body was functioning as the head of the faith until such time as the guidance of the guardian, which was still in effect in the 10-year World Crusade, came to an end and the House of Justice could be elected. So again, we've already read the next part about how they elect this 9-membered body from among themselves. And succession, only the guardian can appoint hands. I'll have a sip of tea here. And therefore, once the hands died, there could be no more hands. And so this is when the institution of the Continental Counselors was appointed to take over the function of both teaching and protection of the cause. Six, the teaching plans. Now, wait a minute. Let me see. Did I get that right? Is that 6 or is that 7? Oh, this should be 7. Sorry. I thought that was 7. The teaching plan. So this is the last one. The tablets of the divine plan consist of 14 tablets revealed by, and that's repeated, isn't it? Abdu'l-Baha during the First World War, addressed to the Baha'is in North America and received by them in 1919, which Shoghi Effendi has called the mandate and the supreme charter for teaching. In all, Abdu'l-Baha mentioned some 120 territories and islands to which the message of Baha'u'llah was to be carried. And of course, these would become some of the pillars that would elect the House of Justice. An immediate response to the tablets was made by a few inspired individuals, such as the amazing Martha Root and Mr. and Mrs. Hyde Dunn, who pioneered to Australia. And so it's not until 1937 that Shoghi Effendi thinks we were ready for a teaching plan of our own. In the meantime, he had, of course, been about the business of spreading the faith throughout the world to establish those pillars. Simultaneously, of course, he was doing many other things, building the World Center, translating the holy text, and so on. But Shoghi Effendi gave the American believers the first 7-year plan that the divine plan began to be generally implemented. So under the umbrella, if you will, or influence or embrace of Abdu'l-Baha's teaching plans, we had the plans of Shoghi Effendi, the first 7-year plan, the second 7-year plan, and the 10-year World Crusade. There were other plans that were given to particular countries. Then you have the plans of the House of Justice, a 9-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 7-year plan, a 6-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 4-year plan, the 12-month plan, of course, which was the precursor to the training institutes and the beginning of the institute process and the framework for action under which we are still working most successfully. And so you had the 4 5-year plans from 2001 to 2021. And now we're in the intervening year of a 1 year of preparation for a 9-year plan that will take us to the year 2031. This is a chart made by Paul Lample in a book that he and Leilani Smith put together that's very useful in showing the timeline, the Baha'i cycle, which will endure 500,000 years, the Baha'i era or the dispensation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, which will endure 1,000 years, the dispensation of Baha'u'llah will. And then you have the 3 ages of the faith, the heroic, the formative, and then the golden age. And so you have that within those, you have the epics, the first, the second, the third, and then you have the epics in the formative age. And we're now in the 5th epoch of the formative age. So finally, I guess I have 8 things then. I'll have to redo this, won't I? The twin institutions. Abdu'l-Baha set out in detail the nature and role of the twin institutions that are his appointed successors and whose complementary functions ensure the unity of the Baha'i cause and the achievement of its mission throughout the dispensation, the guardianship and the universal house of justice. He laid particularly strong emphasis on the authority thus conveyed. So there is no guardian, there is no individual. The guardianship endures and will throughout this dispensation. So the twin institutions are the guardianship, which is the branch of the learned, and the universal house of justice, which is the branch of the rulers, the elected executive bodies. As I said at the outset, this passage from Shoghi Effendi says it all very succinctly, what was accomplished, not solely by Abdu'l-Baha, but without his assistance, none of it could have happened. The emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, the founding of a world civilization and culture, all of which must synchronize with the initial stages in the unfoldment of the golden age of the Baha'i era, should by their very nature be regarded, as far as this planetary life is concerned, as the furthermost limits in the organization of human society. That's an amazing statement when you think about it. So again, this doesn't mean there won't be any changes, but it means the superstructure or the skeletal framework for planetary governance is in the world order of Baha'u'llah. And this is what it looks like at the present. If you graph it out, it's hard to do because there's so much collaboration among all of these institutions. But you have here on the left side, the institution of the learned in Baha, and on the right side, the institution of the learned. This is another version that's in my book, The Plan of God for Planet Earth. It's a little more refined looking, but a little harder to see on a slide. And so that concludes my presentation. This is my favorite picture. This is the first one that was given to me when I became a Baha'i in 1959. And it's, to me, this shows both the power and the love and kindness of this miracle of individuals, this mystery of God. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have if I'm able to.
Thank you so much, John. What a wonderful